Welcome to section 15.6, solving equation with radicals. So when it's talking about equation with radicals, it's talking about when you have a square root or a cube root, which we're mainly going to focus on those two, but the process for higher roots will be the same. It's just you gotta be extra careful because each root works with specific numbers. So again, we're mainly going to focus on square root or the second root and the cube root, or also known as the third root. Let's take a look at the first example that we have here. We have -1 minus 3 times the square root of 4x plus 21 equals to -28. So when you're solving an equation with radicals, the goal is to get the radical by itself. So in this case, let's take a look. You want to get the square root of 4x plus 21. Meaning that we basically need to get rid of this -1 and this -3. So again, make sure to know that the 4x plus 21, that's inside the square root. So essentially we want to get this alone on the left side. I need to get rid of these two numbers. So one thing you need to know is the distinction between -1 and the -3, or also known as the -3. Now, the -3 or the -3 is directly in front of the square root, meaning that it's multiplying to the square root, whereas the -1 is simply just in front of the -3 or -3. So when you're solving and there's multiple steps, so the first thing you want to cancel out is this -1. We're not going to mess with the -3 or -3 because again it's multiplying to the square root. This one, the -1, is not. We're going to cancel this one first. So the opposite of -1 is +1 or add 1. I add 1 to the left side, add 1 to the right side. The ones cancel out, so I'm left with -3 times the square root of 4x plus 21 equal -28 plus 1 will be -27. Now, I need to get rid of the -3 that's in front of the square root. Since it's multiplying, I do the opposite operation, which is divide. So I'm going to divide the left side by -3, therefore dividing the right side by -3. So on the left side, -3 would divide into 1, and I'm just going to have the square root of 4x plus 21 equal -27 divided by -3 will be +9. Alright, now you can clearly see that the square root is by itself on the left side. Now, when you have this by itself and you're trying to get rid of the square root, you're going to do the opposite of square root, which is you're going to square it. So what I mean by square it is that you're going to raise it to the second power. So the opposite of square root is square, or raising it to the second power. So if I raise the left side by the second power, or also known as I'm squaring the left side, then I must do the same thing on the right side. I'm going to square the 9, or I'm raising the 9 by the second power. Now, here, since I am raising this, the square root of 4x plus 21 by the second power, then essentially the radical will go away, and you will be left with 4x plus 21. Then on the right side, 9 to the second power, or 9 squared, will become 81. From there, we're going to solve just like a typical equation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cancel out the +21, so I'm going to subtract 21 on the left side, subtract 21 on the right side. Then what I'm going to have is 4x equal 60 From there, I'm going to divide both sides by 4. So 60 divided by 4, that means it's going to be x equal to 15. And that will be my final answer. And let me box that up. So most of the process is very similar to solving a multi-step equation. The only difference is the radical. In this case, the square root. So once you get the square root by itself on either side, the left side or the right side, then you just basically do the opposite, which is raising it to the second power. So when you're working with other radicals, you always do the opposite, or basically the opposite. So for example, the opposite of cube root or third root is you raise it to the third power. The opposite of the fourth root, you raise it to the fourth power. And the opposite of the fifth root, you raise it to the fifth power, and so on. But again, here, the numbers are very different. So 9 to the second power is 81. Is very different from 9 to the third power or 9 to the fourth power, depending on which type of radical you have in the problem. In this next example, what's different compared to the last example is that this one doesn't have a radical right away, but if you look closely at this rational exponent, inside the parentheses it's negative 3 minus 4x. This whole thing is being raised by the power of 1/2. Now 1/2 is equivalent to a square root, and it's based on the denominator of 2. So when it's 2, while the numerator is 1, then you're going to be working with square root. Same thing with if it was 1/3. If you see 1/3, that is equivalent to a cube root or third root. So here, if you start off with a problem and it has a rational exponent 1/2, then you can easily convert it into a square root, and it will look very similar to the last example. So let's rewrite it with a square root. So everything else will stay the same. The 9, the plus 2, but it's going to be in front of parentheses. That means that the negative 3 minus 4x will be inside the square root. Then everything else equal to 15 will also stay the same. Now we're going to start solving. What I need to do first is cancel out the 9. So I'm going to subtract 9 on the left side, subtract 9 on the right side. The 9's will cancel out. So I'm still going to have 2 times the square root of negative 3 minus 4x equal 15 minus 9 is 6. Now after that, what I need to do is get rid of the 2. And remember, the 2, since it's directly in front of the square root, meaning there's no plus or minus, that means it's multiplying. So the opposite of multiplying is I'm going to divide both sides by 2. So what I'm going to have on the left is the square root of negative 3 minus 4x equal, on the right side, 6 divided by 2 is 3. Now once I have the square root by itself on the left side, what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise it to the second power. Again, the opposite of square root is squaring it or raising it to the second power. Since I raised the left side by the second power, I'm going to raise the right side by the second power. So what I'm going to have on the left side is negative 3 minus 4x equal 3 to the second power is 9. Now I'm going to solve just like a regular equation. So first, I'm going to cancel out the negative 3. I'm going to add 3 to both sides. So I'm going to have negative 4x equal 9 plus 3 is 12. Then after that, I'm going to divide both sides by negative 4. So I'm going to have x equal 12 divided by -4 will be -3. That will be my final answer, and I'm going to box that up. And again, this is my final answer. Now, the only difference was how we started out from the beginning. Since we started off with a rational exponent 1/2 or 1/2, that is easily equivalent to the square root. So everything else will stay the same. It's just that the parenthesis will go away, the 1/2 exponent will go away, and you just replace it with the square root. And once you get to this part, the process is the same as just like the last example.